Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Learning Journey 2 of the Nonprofit Conference series organized by IPS and Tote Board. This is a series of panel discussions and learning journeys that will kind of lead up to an October 4th conference. If you plan on going to the conference, it's face-to-face at Orchard Hotel on the October 4th. So we'll send out the invites to everyone who's already on our mailing list. So if you have attended one of our events, you will be in the mailing list, but you can just book your calendars for that. And so the whole series of dialogues is structured as a collective learning journey because I see this as a kind of we're curating interesting ideas or solutions that we haven't really tried out in Singapore, and then we kind of think they're interesting. We haven't formed any strong positions about them, but we see their potential. So this basic structure of all our conversations have been we invite interesting foreign speakers to come share their ideas and what they've been doing, and then we have local practitioners and experts kind of reflect on their feasibility and the value in our local context and circumstances. So just before we start, quick definition that somebody was asking me why are we talking about co-ops in the non-profit conference? Because co-ops technically they are not non-profit, right? They are businesses, they can generate profit. And so the reason why the conference is named non-profit because it was the best term that we could use that people still understood. Because we are interested in non-profit social service agencies, arts, health, education, and there are various terms for this. You can call this the voluntary sector organization, you can call it third sector, to some extent, yeah, civil society, or the Europeans like to call it the social economy. And so it's not just non-profits or service providers or voluntary organizations. We are interested in social enterprises, cooperatives. In a sense, if you can talk about what's within our radar, we're interested in issues such as disability, ex-offenders, youth at risk, etc. But in terms of the kind of community partners and assets that we care about, they include everyone from social workers, social service providers, philanthropy, games for change, civic tech, community arts groups, social enterprises, and of course cooperatives. So Learning Journey 2 and Panel 2 are about co-ops, but not just any kind of co-ops, a special kind of co-ops in my mind. So these are some of the questions we hope to find some answers to. First, the basic questions, right? First, what are co-ops? What are examples of co-ops elsewhere in Singapore? And I think Emma from Equal Care will paint us a picture of what co-ops are. And then Vincent from A Good Space who will he's been through this journey of registering a co-op, so he's some understanding of the local landscape. So Vincent will do that. But I'll read you the International Cooperative Alliance's cooperative principles. It includes, open voluntary membership, democratic control, member economic participation, concern for community, and very interesting to me is cooperation amongst cooperatives. In Singapore, cooperatives cannot register as a charity, right? So there are no tax exemptions for them. And in Singapore also, the cooperatives are administered and regulated under the MCCY, the Ministry of Culture, Community and Youth. And as I understand it, in other countries, co-ops might be administered under their equivalent of MTI, the Ministry of Trade and Industry, because they see co-ops as an engine of growth. Whereas in Singapore, we see co-ops more like a kind of community building. So that's kind of an interesting kind of contrast. So we want to understand what are co-ops. We want to understand why changemakers like Emma and Vincent and Susan have decided to choose to set up a co-op compared to other possibilities. What's their experience of starting their co-ops? How do they generate income and become financially sustainable? How do members come together to make collective decisions? So those are the basic questions. Then we get to the harder questions, like the more significance of co-ops questions. What is the potential of using cooperatives that have a democratic organizational form to deliver social care or enact social change? And I say this because co-ops do not necessarily have some kind of social or community concern. Some co-ops and some members can have a purely economic motive. And for that matter, co-ops aren't always fully or meaningfully democratic. For example, while the committee of management is elected, they may end up making most of the significant decisions that affect everyone. And cooperatives also often simply hire employees to achieve their goals. And since these employees are not members, to them it is a job, just like any other job. So in a sense, a co-op can function broadly similarly to a regular corporation, which is why to me it is quite interesting when I found out about worker-owned co-ops, because if we consider low-wage workers who typically have little control over their work conditions and wages, many now are pointing to worker-owned cooperatives as a vehicle to foster economic inclusion and social mobility. And also in the age of gig work, platform cooperatives are also becoming interesting. What if workers, delivery riders, drivers, restaurants, and taxi drivers collectively own their platform? The argument there then is that the profits that are generated will not flow out to Silicon Valley and stay in the community itself. Next week, Wednesday at the same time, 13th of July, we will have Trevor Schultz, who wrote the book on platform cooperatives. And in fact, Equal Care is a platform cooperative. And you want to learn more about platform co-ops. And then we'll also have Seed Commons come. They are a kind of, they finance co-ops and they support worker-owned cooperatives. In August, at the end of August, we are also planning a Baltimore study trip. And there we will have Seed Commons host us, and they will bring us to see a couple of worker-owned co-ops as well. If you're interested in all that, just look at our event site and you can apply for the Baltimore study trip there. So beyond the potential of using co-ops for delivering social care or enacting social change, I guess in my mind, what are the trade-offs for doing this using a cooperative structure? Under what conditions should we use this form of organization, and under what conditions would a more traditional kind of organizational form be more suitable? And how do you scale these efforts and still ensure meaningful democratic participation? And even more broadly, can the right type of cooperatives be a meaningful challenge to this profit-driven, competitive, and extractive economy that's depleting our earth? Can it engender a more cooperative economy that creates commonly shared wealth? Bigger questions. So in my mind, if we just get to the basics, and then I'm sure our speakers will kind of lend insights into the more significant questions. Even if we just get the basics, I count it as a win already. The exemplars of co-ops that we've chosen to come speak to us today all have a kind of democratic and organizational innovation within them. So in terms of who they think about, who's a member, who can be part of a community, in terms of meaningful participation and collective decision making, how should we coordinate our work and make decisions? For example, and Spiral itself is at the forefront of helping organizations implement collaborative governance, right? Decentralized organizing and self-managing teams. And in fact, they created Lumio, which I think Equal Care actually uses to make decisions. How do you think about your business or service models? What kind of work is meaningful to do and how should it be done? And even kind of innovative financing models, how do you get the resources to do work? So Equal Care has community shares whereby you have investors come put money into the co-op and they get 10% of the votes for very good reasons. And Emma can tell you more about that. These co-ops also have a very strong social cause or focus. So I think that interesting, particularly because these organizations have chosen a very different way of answering the same questions a lot of nonprofit practitioners answer these questions. Maybe you're a nonprofit, maybe you're a social worker, and let's say you want to help the youth, and you think, okay, these kids don't do well in school. What do? Most of us have, give them tuition. If they can't afford tuition, we will find volunteers to do the tuition, or we will pay for people to give them the tuition. And in one of the Baltimore study trip organizations who was hosting us, these guys answer the question differently. They say, what if we paid slightly older youth to a wage to teach the slightly younger youth? And so they don't have to end up flipping burgers because they need an income, and they get to contribute back to their community. They solidify their own foundations in math and science, and they're kind of teaching their younger cohort in a language and style and culture and norms that they are familiar with. So the kids might take to each other, and they're entirely youth-run organization. If you're 25 years old, you're out of it. If let's say you care about people with disabilities, and if you can't work, that people with disabilities here go to a day activity center. And what do you do there? You get a set of structured activities, might do some arts and crafts. Once in a while, you go to a park. What if the carers there, as well as the people with disabilities, were co-owners of a co-op? Then would you get to make decisions? And maybe you would say, I don't need a personal assistant. I just need to pay my friend to bring me to watch a movie. and you can make decisions like that. So they're all kind of interesting things to think of different ways of answering the same questions. So the structure of the session today will have Emma share for about 30 minutes, and then Vincent will share about 15 minutes. And because Vincent's part of us, so we know him, and we will have many opportunities to talk to him again. So I gave him short shrift. I gave him less time than the others. But the reason is also because I see him both as a speaker and a discussant. So at the discussion section, he can reflect, and so he'll be able to share more as well. And then Susan will talk for 30 minutes, and then there'll be a discussion and dialogue, and then we'll have breakout rooms. One breakout room will, if you want to have a more casual chat or ask questions to Emma, and then the other breakout room, you want to have a more casual chat with Susan. And so without much further ado, can I invite Emma to come share with us about equal care?
Hello, everybody. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. It feels very special to be connecting with cooperators in Singapore on the other side of the hemisphere. A few caveats before I begin. It is waking up and getting ready for school time in my house. So there will be some interruptions from an 8-year-old and a very hyperactive 4-year-old. Both of them kind of bumbling around in the mornings. But TV is out of bounds this morning, so that I can talk to you all. I would also like to just say, please use the chat. So as I'm talking, I will be keeping an eye on the chat. I will be responding to the chat as well. And when we go through the slides, I've basically just tried to pack absolutely everything in. So I'm going to talk about the what and the why of equal care. Why are we a platform co-op? What is a platform co-op? Where does that come from? You'll hear more about that from Trevor next week, so I won't go into it in too much detail. A bit about our origin story, a bit about the situation in care in the UK, which I'm sure that many of you will be able to relate to in Singapore, because it is a universally devalued job the world over. And then I think particularly picking up on discussions around our governance model, but how they relate to our model of support. So the two are very, very interconnected. They are kind of one and the same. Then I'll move on to gigs, gig economy, worker rights, and what are the features of equal care that make us an ethical gig. Because we do believe there is such a thing. And then talking about the platform, and finally I will go into a little bit in how we're funded, including some of the barriers to funding and investment that we face in the UK, but also some context around what I'm aware of for how platform co-ops have been able to fund themselves in a global context. So I hope that's going to be useful. Please use the chat. I would really, really appreciate it, and to kind of hear your thoughts and to see your reactions as we go. Okay, so I'm going to jump in. As we go, I will enlarge these slides, so you don't need to zoom into your screen. It's okay, I will make these bigger. So first of all, what on earth is a platform co-op? We see platform co-ops as a form of digital ownership, and it is essentially, we've created an organization that can build and own a digital asset that we can keep in control of, and where we can set the terms and conditions of that work. So unlike the conditions that come in through Uber, through Airbnb, through kind of various other platforms that obviously have a very profit-focused motive, we can optimize the platform to make it work best for its users and for its owners, for the people that provide the labor through it and the people that receive those services through it. And that is our absolute top line priority. So here we can see economic fairness, democratic participation. It says here online businesses, because we're delivering care and support, obviously the vast majority of what we do is not online, it is offline, giving and receiving. And the way that we're structured as a platform co-op, so you can see here in the diagram that the investor votes are weighted with a reduced proportion, and then everybody else is one member, one vote. So we are a multi-stakeholder cooperative where the people receiving support, their families, and the people giving support, whether that's in a voluntary capacity or a paid capacity, whether it's independent, self-employed, or whether it's employed, it doesn't matter. If you're contributing your labor, then that means that you're eligible for membership with Equal Care. The overall kind of wrapper, and I see this idea of platform co-ops as a wrapper that we can fit into, it came about when I read Trebor's paper that he published with Nathan Schneider in 2016, I believe. And I had this kind of idea knocking about my head, and I read the paper, was like, that's it, that's the frame that this thing that I'm thinking about for care, for how we can take away the middleman, or more commonly the middle woman, in caregiving relationships, and to try and kind of put that almost like day-to-day social justice into every single interaction of giving, of receiving, of payment, of conditions, of transparency and choice. And I was thinking, we need a digital product to do this. We need to leverage the power of these big platforms to be able to use it for social good. And we also need to be very clear that that ownership model isn't a charitable model. So my background's charity type work. And so it's not a case of beneficiaries, grateful recipients, and then providers. It is about ownership. It is about mutual care and mutual aid. So there is going to be a little bit of background noise. If you would just give me a moment, I'm going to call out to my family to ask them to pipe down a little bit. Okay, that was basically begging my family to be a little bit quieter, please. Okay, so we kind of started from these first principles here, that it's about power. So we talked about the technology, we talked about the governance, and we talked about what those kinds of things enable, and concluded that the source of everything that we were about and everything that we were trying to do was about rebalancing that power dynamic between the person who gives and the person who receives, which in so many care and health systems around the world is undermined, attracts a great deal of oversight, attracts a great deal of criticism, is very heavy work, often includes a lot of emotional labor, which is unrecognized on the part of both the person who gives and the person who receives. There we go. And which focuses really carefully on those micro interactions that happen between the person who gives and the person who receives. And then we build an organization and a structure that is entirely in service to that working and that flourishing. So what that then leads to is what we call a very relationship-centered approach, rather than a person-centered approach, which I don't know is if that's a common term in health and social care in Singapore, but it's basically the difference between being consumer-oriented and being well, relationship oriented, reciprocity oriented, very much focused on the give and take in relationships, rather than paying attention to exclusively kind of creating this sort of wonderful experience for the customer, as you may experience, say, through shopping with Amazon, whilst completely neglecting the role of the frontline worker in doing that. So our journey, the thing that really kicked us off was in 2019, we were able to raise £410,000 of community investment. So this was through community shares, which is a form of withdrawable share capital. So the share itself does not change in value. It's at par value. It's £1 for £1. You invest £1, you get back £1. And then the cooperative commits to paying an interest rate or a dividend rate, but it's more, it feels much more like an interest rate on that investment. So this investment said we committed to paying 3% on the investment after 3 years. So it was very much a solidarity investment. Because it's on the equity side of our balance sheet, it was able to attract a form of tax relief in the UK, which meant that people could claim 50% back from their income tax amounts from what they originally invested, which really helped. And then what this did was allow us to run a people first pilot, which we launched in March 2020, which was the point at which the UK finally decided that maybe lockdown would be a good idea. So that was really challenging, actually. That was really, really challenging. Despite that, we grew much more slowly than we were hoping to grow, but we had some grants, we had COVID support grants, we were able to continue the development of the digital platform over the course of COVID. And we were also able to register with the regulator in the UK, the Care Quality Commission. So that was another really key decision that we made over the course of that year, which was to not be what's known as an introductory agency over here, which essentially the platform puts you in connection with each other and then washes its hands of you. And just says, you know, well, if it doesn't go well, then it doesn't go well. Come and find somebody else through our platform. We then stayed relatively static over 2021 as, you know, for some inexplicable reason, the pandemic refused to go away. But over the course of late 2021, I'm being tongue-in-cheek, by the way, just for we finally found our software engineer who was able to really accelerate the platform development, which was absolutely fantastic. By the time we arrived here in 2022, we were feeling pretty beaten up. It's been a tough few years, and we then launched our Back on Track community share offer a few months ago, to be able to get back on track and to restart and scale up our growth ambitions. We have a comment from Eugene: the relationship between equal care co-op and governmental overview. The main overview that we get is from the Care Quality Commission. And now you've mentioned the tax office there, Eugene, which is very interesting. So HMRC in the UK have regulated gig-based platforms. We call it the snitch report. So every 3 months we have to submit this report to HMRC that says this is the amount our workers have earned through the platform. This is their national insurance number. You know, this is so that you know how much they're earning and how much you expect to see on their tax returns at the end of the year. So that is the full extent of the support that HMRC give against that. we exist in a real contradictory space, in relation to our self-employed workers. So the CQC perceives them as staff. It says, if something goes wrong with a self-employed worker, then Equal Care Co-op is at fault and we will chase you. In our agreement with self-employed workers, we acknowledge that, but in effect, the independent worker is also responsible, is individually responsible for their own practice, but we go down together, basically. So as a result, all of our recruitment processes, our vetting processes are exactly the same as if they would be coming on as an employed worker. There is no difference. If we wouldn't employ the person, then they don't get onto the platform as an independent worker. It's very clear. This is just a brief thing on this is who we are. So I will just very briefly run through this. There's Matt, our lead software engineer, who joined us relatively recently. Luke, who is starting Equal Care Co-op in London and leading on much more of a kind of community-based kind of grassroots and campaigning angle. And then Kate, myself, and Adam, we're up here in Yorkshire, focused on the funding and on getting this pilot work off the ground, and there are a few organizations that have supported us in the past. So here's the why, which I won't I don't know how much of you will resonate with this, but or what the context is of how care is given in Singapore, but in the UK people do runs. So in some areas of the UK, visits can be as short as 15 minutes. Where we are, they're about 30 minutes is the minimum, and the care worker will be given a rota and their run for the week, and they will often see up to around 40 people in the week, which, when you're thinking from a psychological kind of empathic perspective, how on earth can you as a human being have compassion for all of those people? How can you care for that number of people when so much of care and support at home is relationship based? So here we go. There's a sort of very, very typical experience here, feeling like meat on a conveyor belt being processed at speed. So there are huge numbers of ways in which both people in a relationship are exploited and ignored, not only through very poor contractual arrangements for care workers, but then also a complete lack of choice on the part of the people receiving support, where, for example, if they don't say yes to being supported by a man, then they don't get any care at all, which is yeah, some of the symptoms of market failure are very much in existence in the UK. So these are our three kind of this is the magic recipe, I guess, is what this is. So we're working to a decentralized structure, which I will show you a diagram of. We are very focused on what it means to respect the work, to honor the work, to kind of go a lot deeper than just saying, oh, it's great, don't care workers do a wonderful job, let's give them a clap and a smile. It is about really connecting with it and honoring it. So an example of how we're working with that is we commissioned a painter who exhibits at the National Gallery in London to do some portraits of some of our care and support teams, our relationships. So he's painting in oils. It's kind of one of those sort of more status symbol kind of things that we just want to go, look, this is really important work, and it needs to be invested in by society and by government, and then the digital platform, of course, which brings it all together. So the idea with Equal Care is you build your profile. So just getting into the nitty gritty now. If you are getting support, you build your profile with your relative, or you get somebody from Equal Care to help you, which is the more common route. And then your giving support profile, again, as part of that recruitment process, the recruiter will help you build your profile. the key thing about our platform is that you can both give and get support. So you can have what we call a giving support hat and a getting support hat, which is kind of one of the ways in which we want to trouble those sort of real pigeonholing that people experience when they engage with health and care systems. You are only a patient, you are only a service user, you are only a care worker. The KPIs are not numerically run. I'll come to that. We do have numbers, I promise. The fundamental thing about the people who are giving support is that there is a consent-based process. You can decide to be self-employed or you can decide to be employed. So fundamentally, consent needs to sit at the heart of how you want your work to happen. And then we have coaches, which again, for those of you who are aware of Buurtzorg, who are there to support people's practice development, and then also there for problem solving. Then we talk about teams in equal care. So as you join equal care, when you're looking for support, you build your team. And the whole idea of a team is that, oh, I thought it was coming up a little bit later. Okay, I'm going to skip to this one. The whole idea of a team is that you own it as the person getting support, and then you nominate the people who joins your team. So that could be family member, it could be a care worker, it could be someone from another agency, it could be a neighbor, it could you get the idea, it could be a volunteer. And then the entire platform is built around this idea of teams and the hats that people have within teams. So as a care worker, I might be in, say, 5 teams. In one of those teams, I might be responsible for keeping the medication administration record up to date. In another of those teams, I might be responsible for holding the rota. And maybe in another of those teams, I'm just doing the care. So it really depends on the relationship that you have with the person that you're providing the support to, how big the team is, and the length of time that you've been with Equal Care and what training you've had to be able to hold those hats. So this is apologies. Sorry, I'll be sharing these slides later because I realize I haven't enlarged that slide. So apologies. So just very briefly, this is just a run through of the things that make it different. There's choice of who you support. Relationships are consistent. So we've had a teams going for a couple of years. We've had some very long running teams where you see the kinds of commitment from people that you get more usually in relationships where the person is employed directly by the person getting support. So PAs and so on. There's real commitment there. And then we keep the rates the same, and the care workers get more pay. And then we have things like there's a bread fund, and then sort of training, career development, and contracted employment, of course. So on the platform itself, this is just our chat. So there's chat, there is a way of doing bookings, like there's sort of all of the basics really that you might expect from a platform. There's ways of seeing who wants work, there's ways of seeing who wants people to join their team. And there's a kind of consent process that goes through all of those. The roadmap that we have, so we have not been able to develop at the rate that our for-profit competitors have been because we are not venture capital funded. In fact, our software engineer took a 50% pay cut in order to be able to work with us. So we're on a slower development cycle, and we're just kind of working on getting bookings sorted at the moment. For those of you who are curious about our wider governance, this is where the Buurtzorg stuff starts coming in. So we've got here the teams, which you saw earlier, those team structures, and that is a governance structure itself that is recognised in Equal Care. And then these are the local circles here. So Todmorden, Halifax, these are local towns in Calderdale, and then Calderdale is our sort of local authority council level circle. and then those kind of integrate into the shared circles in the organization. We use a governance system called Sociocracy, which is based on, thanks Justin, Sociocracy for All, which is a really great resource to have a look at, and that uses consent decision making as a way of being able to engage membership, but without it being one of the problems of co-ops is that they can get quite adversarial because it's on a voting structure. So all the key decisions that we make at Equal Care are consent based, which is not the same as consensus, I might add. So it is focused on getting things done as well as ensuring that everybody's voice is heard. Here are some of the impacts that we've had with our work. Okay, they've gone to school now. So for Shares, this was her experience doing independent care, choosing the hours you can work, great support from the facilitators, which are coaches, and then yes, the carers matter. And then here, this is from Jed, who's said that, you know, I don't think you have any idea how much better it is than what we had before. It's just a different world. Okay, so gig work. Can I just do a time check? How much time do I have left? Because I can feel myself slightly rushing, but just so I know what.
We're supposed to be at 3. You have a few minutes, but you know, you can go on for like.
No. I'll be judicious in the next slide selections.
So 5 to 10 minutes, up to you.
Okay, thank you. Gig work. Now, this is the thing that can get quite controversial, I guess. So it is gig work of a kind. In social care in the UK, a lot of people who give care are on 0 hours contracts. So in a way, social care kind of invented gig work originally before the big platforms came along and made it cool to talk about. So we've looked at what it means to be working independently, what it means to be working as employed. And one of the big indicators that we were on the right track was when we started, we weren't able to offer employment contracts. So all we could do was offer independent work because we hadn't built up there's the chicken and egg problem. We hadn't built up the numbers of people looking for support to be able to do that. So we were very clear on managing expectations around that. And then about 1.5 years later, how long it took before I finally said, hey, we can offer proper employment contracts. Nobody wanted them. And this was in a cohort of about 25 workers, and they didn't want them because the relationship between employee and employer in social care is so damaged already, and there is such a lack of trust there in terms of how workers are treated. So that was kind of the push side. On the pull side, they already were experiencing so much more autonomy, and they're looking at the hourly rate, so which is higher. It's about £16-17 per hour that people get for care, for giving their care at Equal Care as an independent, whereas our employed rate is lower, but is based on it doesn't matter whether you're traveling or whether you're giving care or whether you're training or meetings or whatever, it's you still get paid. So recently we have since had around four people now come over to become employed with us, which is great. So that's like part of the experiment for this year. Let's see what I would like to show you next. I will speak to the question here, the profile of our investor members. So yeah, I'll just speak about the investment side of things. We've got 184 investor members, and some of them have invested £100, and most of them have invested £100. Some of them have invested sums much larger than that, and the No, it's not micro lending, Eugene. No, no. That is very much different, a different thing. It might share some features in that the initial investment that you can make is very small. So the vast majority of people invest in us. We have care workers investing in us. We have people looking for support investing in us. So it's a real mix of people who are very close to the problem, and then also institutional investors who are very curious about the problem and want to solve it. So it's a real mix of people that we've got. Anything kind of based on sort of retiring lawyers through to people who do sort of serial in ethical investing, through to we even have a crypto millionaire who's invested £50,000 in us. You know, it's a real mix. So what we are currently, I'll bring this one up. It's my little pitch to you all. What we're currently doing is our community shares investment, which is the Back on Track offer that I mentioned earlier, and that's targeting a fairly modest £350,000. We've already raised around 150 of that, and then we have a commitment of the other 50k coming from an institutional investor once we hit our 300 mark, and the starting investment for that is just £100. So if you want to continue being involved in us, this is a really easy way to do it. And the purpose of this investment is to be able to grow where we are, but to complete the digital product and then to be able to use that. So we've got the infrastructure for starting new circles elsewhere in the country, and one day, hopefully, the rest of the world. But on very much a federated type structure, going back to those circles. Break-even numbers that we need per location is to have 100, and so at the moment we're supporting, so I'll do it in workers, it's a bit easier. So 25, we've got 25 workers at the moment, so we're still very small, we're still very tiny, and we need to get to 70 workers per council-based location to hit sustainability in that area. So our break-even turnover levels are around £100,000 a month, and that will get each location to sustainability. The interesting thing, which is the last bit that I would like to talk about, is the different ways in which platform co-ops have attracted investment globally, because it is hard to do investment as a cooperative because your rules really constrain that, and actually legislation and in our case financial services rules constrain that. So we are looking at developing a new set of rules, our cooperative rules, that will allow investors to transfer shares with one another, and potentially allow some form of capital gain, which is again, a little bit controversial, but when you're in a market where the average care platform is able to raise anything between 2 to 12 million in their Series A, we need to be able to up our game, and we can only do that if we have an investment product that big investors can look to, so kind of ESG funds, pension funds, and at the moment the community shares, regulated investors that invest in that have an aspect of regulation to their investment strategies cannot invest in us, because community shares are an unregulated financial product, so because they don't change in capital value. So our next project is to work with the FCA to enable that under the cooperative legislation in the UK, and to try and come up with a third way that is not community shares, and that is not the other method that platform co-ops like drivers.coop has used, which is revenue-based funding, which is very, very expensive for the cooperative itself and puts all the onus on the co-op for returning the value to investors, whereas the The delight of the for-profit world is that the onus of returning the value to investors is partially on the business, but it's also on the investors themselves and on the changing value of the business. So that is everything. Well, it's not everything. It's a whistle-stop tour of everything. And yes, thank you. Will it run you the risk of ending up as a for-profit organization? We are very aware of that risk. I mean, one of the other ways that we could look to raising investment is through doing it where the cooperative owns another entity, which is basically for profit. But because the cooperative is the majority owner, then it keeps the purpose and it keeps the mission. I think that cooperatives, in order to continue to be relevant, well, I mean, they're losing, in the UK, they are losing relevance, and they have been for the last, I don't know, 30 years or so. And if we're going to do something to change the economy and to move those sorts of financial flows and those money flows, there's millions, billions of pounds being poured into for-profit business. If we can even just divert a fraction of that into organizations like co-ops, social enterprises, CICs, charity, you know, and anything that has purpose before profit, then I think we're doing something that's pretty special for the world.
Thank you so much, Emma. And for anyone else who has questions, you can join the breakout room where Emma will be at, and you can have a casual chat there. For now, can I welcome Vincent to tell us more about the Good Space?
Oh, hi. Hello, everyone. Very good afternoon to you. Thank you, Justin, for inviting me to share and also learn from everyone today. I think compared to both of the speakers today, we are still quite a young cohort. So where I'm kind of wanting to come from is to share some of our reflections from our experience starting Singapore's first cooperative for social change makers, and also mainly the challenges and the payoffs we discovered for creating social change through a co-op structure. So let me just share my slides real quick. Yeah, there you go. So my name is Vincent. I was one of the 6 founding members of the A Good Space Co-op, and currently I serve as its general manager. Very nice to see some friends in the chat today. Crystal, Sunita, Alex, Junsi, and Siu Ling. Thanks for making time. And these are kind of before I start, I wanted to maybe start off with why we register as a co-op. And for this, I want to tell a story. So meet Evelyn. She's a working professional. She has a full-time job, but she cares deeply for the cause of aphasia, which is a speech impairment condition that occurs after a stroke or a brain injury. And recently, Bruce Willis was diagnosed with this, and it was kind of featured in the mainstream media as well. So studies have shown that almost 93% of persons with aphasia or PWAs suffer from psychological distress and depression within 6 months of their diagnosis. So after seeing many patients in her former career as a speech therapist, Evelyn decided to start Chit Chat Cafe, which is this photo that you see here. It's a monthly pop-up cafe for PWAs and their caregivers to meet and also to interact so that they can reduce social isolation. She's been going at it for a few years now. Her dream, every time she meets me, she tells me, one day, can I have a full-time team to run Aphasia SG as an NPO, as a non-profit organization? And here at A Good Space, I think really we believe that Singapore becomes a more inclusive society when we have ordinary citizens like Evelyn who don't just complain, they come forward, complement the government, they complement the formal institutions to do more for the communities they care about. But unfortunately, Evelyn faces several challenges. I think the first challenge is that it's easy to start, but very difficult to sustain her projects because of many different reasons. So the chasm from being a ground-up initiative where you are kind of making impact on an ad hoc basis to now saying that I have kind of achieved some form of impact that's maybe hyper-local, or I have kind of piloted a kind of successful test case and wanting to build a sustainable organization is a huge jump. Because many of folks like Evelyn start off with the social impact in mind, but not necessarily wanting to kind of having the skills to build an organization. There's also very little time to learn and network across sectors. And I think that's really a big missed opportunity for her because she's unable to learn best practices that maybe someone else in, say, the climate change space may have for the challenges that she's facing. And I think we see this also during the COVID-19 pandemic when migrant workers were stuck in their dormitories and suicide ideation, mental health became a huge issue. A lot of the NGOs in the migrant worker space benefited from learning from some of the mental health NGOs who had developed processes for peer support, suicide intervention. So that kind of cross-sector learning can be very useful. And really alone is very difficult to contribute to systemic change. And systemic change, I think, as we all know, requires mobilizing multi-sector stakeholders, and Evelyn may not necessarily have the time, the networks, or the experience to do this by herself. For example, if she wants to encourage companies to hire persons with aphasia, she may need to involve people who have influence, like folks from government agencies, from employers, from social service agencies. This alone. And actually, this is not just Evelyn's issue. Other people like Daniel, Louis, Abhishek, Ning, they all face these issues in one way or another that hinder their ability to continue to do good change makers, which can actually lead to them burning out and dropping out of their projects. And then 5 years later, some new batch of people come along, go through the same challenges, and then they drop out again. So if knowing the positive impact that these communities and networks can have, right, I think we really wondered, rather than struggling alone, how might we find new ways of organizing change makers to create greater social impact together that they couldn't have done alone. So in 2020, we incorporated A Good Space as a co-op to do 3 things for our members. The first thing really was to create a community for them to help each other's change-making projects. So the idea of mutual aid to help them with sustaining their organization was critical for us. Then we do sort of kind of organized learning circles to help facilitate learning across different sectors on topics that are relevant for change making, and we hope that this will help them grow as leaders of their various change making initiatives. We also kind of, with these relationships and trust built, organize these multi-sector collectives to create change for complex issues such as migrant workers and digital inclusion that no single organization can solve alone. So now we have about 34 members. They cover 15 different issues and communities, and here they are at a glance. Adrian is one of them. As you can see, they really cover a variety of different people, from individual social enterprises to representatives working in charities. But I think we are all united by this belief that we want to do more for the issues and communities that we care about. That our responsibility as a citizen is not just to vote once every 5 years, is to come forward to actually use our hands, use our heart, use our head to contribute. Why register as a co-op? So of all the structures that we have chosen, charity, society, CLG, private limited, we chose to register as a co-op for 3 main reasons. The first one, so these are the 6 founding members of A Good Space, like Anthea, Mel, Vincent, myself, Abhishek, Martinez, and Evelyn. We wanted it to be a neutral third space for civic action, where representatives, whether you are from the people sector, the private sector, or the public sector, you can come and contribute to change. And this entity is not just owned by any single organization, it's owned by the citizens. Instead of a private limited where maybe power is in the kind of hands of a few. We also wanted members to be working owners who contribute to the activities of the co-op beyond just receiving services or being beneficiaries of our organization. The third piece was also important, and that's why we chose this over a society, is we wanted to be intentional about having to be financially sustainable through a business model that generates income beyond grants and donations. There's a 4th reason that I didn't put in here, which is, I guess, kind of a smaller reason, but also somewhat important, is we wanted to be innovative and try something new. Because we were doing some research, and actually, a co-op of social change makers, Singapore doesn't seem to have that, or maybe not even in the region as well. And then recently, when we learned about, when I learned about Enspiro through Justin, just so excited to see someone who's walked the path so many years ahead. So very, very much looking forward to Susan's sharing later. But really, it was and still is an experiment that enlivens us and challenges us each and every single day. And before I share my reflections, I thought I would just share some of the kind of stats about co-ops in Singapore. There are currently 84 of us. I think A Good Space is the 82nd, if I'm not wrong. 62 are consumer and services co-ops, which provide goods or services to members to meet daily needs. So these are, I think the most famous one would be NTUC Fair Price. All of us know that. Income until very recently was one as well. And then also Food Fair. 22 of them are actually credit co-ops, which provide financial services such as grants or loans to members who are within a pre-existing association or community. For example, the Singapore Teachers Union Co-op, that is one. So now I wanted to share 3 challenges that we encountered and our reflections so far, working on creating social change through the model of a co-op. And the first really is, what relationship do we want to have with our members? When we first started, we spent a lot of time designing membership benefits because supporting these change makers to sustain, grow, and amplify their impact was one of our key objectives. And in the beginning, we had 2 memberships, ordinary membership. So this is where members own shares. and they were therefore co-owners of the co-op, and also associate membership, where members paid for services provided by the co-op, but they didn't own shares. I think we were maybe too eager to support our members. We might have created a sort of customer mindset, and some members actually expected to be served by the co-op staff, myself and my team, because of the membership fee that they had paid. So while supporting members were important, I think a key part of our co-op was really to encourage these members, these change makers, to be working members, right? Not to be just consumers or customers. So for example, like, if two change makers are very good at engaging the media, can they share their media list with us so that other members in the co-op can benefit when they're trying to pitch different stories to journalists for their social issues? Or maybe even when we are applying for grant applications, can we give feedback to one another, and that kind of sharing of knowledge, rather than just sitting back and expecting the kind of staff team to kind of serve them. Another example would have also been to participate in subcommittees that help with the operations of the cooperative. So for example, starting a subcommittee to help the co-op with fundraising, or starting a subcommittee to help the co-op develop a process for grievance management when there are conflicts in the co-op. And then the third kind of thing that I think about also is to maybe getting them to come forward to work with other members on social impact projects that they couldn't do alone. So the key question that I think we are still kind of trying to answer is, how do we then balance supporting the members with this idea of nurturing their agency to come forward to help one another and create projects with the co-op? And I think generally also not many people know what a co-op is in Singapore and how to participate in one. So we found this concept of a working member, it was quite difficult to explain and to understand. A lot of our members are also change makers who are themselves struggling with very limited resources and money and time. Right? So I think the mindset of like, if I pay for something, then I expect to receive something, I expect an ROI, is very strong. And having them go beyond the needs of their own projects to see the benefits of building this a good space as a co-op, as an organization that will eventually help the change-making landscape in the longer term has been quite a tough sell. This made our member recruitment very, very tough, and our attempts at kind of building a culture of mutual aid and collaboration quite challenging. The kind of positive side is we do have a small group of members who believe in vision. In this vision, Adrian is one of them. On the wall behind me, there are 34 faces here. There are about 10 of them are really actively vested in this. And we are hopeful of expanding this group of people. And hopefully this wall one day can be a list of 100 plus citizens, 200 citizens who care about Singapore enough to want to come forward. And at our last annual general meeting, the ordinary members actually voted to remove the associate membership and make it compulsory for all members to own shares and to be co-owners in support of this culture of working membership that we hope to build. So this is kind of like our first reflection as a co-op. The second reflection is, I think, is diversity a strength and a weakness? While the diversity of these 34 members representing 15 issues and communities can be a strength, it can also be a weakness. One thing we've seen successful co-ops overseas do, especially in Spiro, is that the members create ventures or projects together that alone they couldn't have. And then this is incubated by the co-op, just like what Spiro has done with Lumio, like what Justin mentioned. I think besides supporting change makers to sustain their projects, this really was one of the exciting possibilities we saw, that AGS as a co-op could possibly bring through a co-op model. But the reality is, I think for us, finding a common thread amongst members who are so diverse has been very difficult. At first, we focused a lot of effort in organizing various social activities for them to get to know one another, to build relationships, thinking that maybe this could organically lead to some projects or ventures being created from the ground up. And while we have seen many this kind of ad hoc collaborative projects between members, like organizing a film screening, starting a soup kitchen, it takes a lot of time, coffee chats, and late night Zoom calls. Many of us will know that collaboration, and I think by extension, community building is a bit like growing a plant. We can lay the best soil, we can water it every day, but really it's up to the plant to grow. And it will grow at its own time. It will grow at the speed of trust. And as much as we want members to create meaningful projects together, and we do our best to facilitate the conditions for that to happen, it cannot be manufactured. And I think having this patience, for me personally, has been quite difficult, especially when we are trying to demonstrate this social impact that the co-op is creating, and so that we can get funding. So I think one of the key things we've also done is to also convene these two multi-sector collectives, right? So this photo that you see, you can see kind of like Michael is from a health serve, a migrant worker NGO. Nasmu represents the migrant workers site in Singapore. Eunice from MOM, Dr. Mark from Shell. Like this whole idea of getting the stakeholders at the same table to not just discuss, as a lot of panels out there do, but to ideate and to create solutions, is something that we really feel that us as a co-op can help to effect change. The kind of, I guess, challenging thing is that in these two kind of collectives that we have convened in migrant workers and digital inclusion, only a few of our members are interested in these issues. And a majority of them actually don't really see the relevance. Like, oh, why should I care about migrant workers? Or why should I care about digital inclusion? So really finding a common thread that unites members to create something they couldn't have done alone is one question that really keeps me up at night. Every night, actually, even just last night, we had a very intense discussion on this. And I guess we still are on a learning journey to find out how to harness the richness of the diversity we have. So just now, actually, when Emma shared her kind of membership model and the different kind of ways that people can be engaged, I was so fascinated by that, and definitely kind of want to learn more. My third reflection is actually finding a viable business model to operate the co-op has also been a very interesting challenge. The things that we place most of our energy in, fostering mutual aid, creating cross-sector learning opportunities, and convening these multi-sector collaborative projects, have not generated much income, or if not any income for us. So how do we balance the kind of social concerns and economic concerns? And membership contributions right now aren't significant enough. Most of our members also can't afford significant contributions in the first place. So we found it quite difficult also to explain the work of a co-op to several funders that we've spoken to. So they prefer to fund the projects of our members who work more with the direct beneficiaries, as opposed to maybe some of the more upstream ecosystem kind of building work that AGS Co-op is trying to do. So far, our kind of way of sustaining in the first 2 years, and we were kind of forced to be viable, financially viable from day one. We subsidize our social impact work with income through running training programs. And in a way, it also has a longer term impact for our co-op, where we go to schools, we train the students to care about different issues, and then hopefully one day these students can become members on this wall. And if different people on this wall have different priorities in life, hopefully the students can take over and ensure that Singapore constantly has this repository or this pool of active citizens wanting to step forward to help. But yeah, so this idea of balancing doing good and making money has really been a challenge that stretches us in so many ways. So I'm really curious to learn about how co-ops in other countries receive their funding, and if there are new models we can learn from. The idea of the community share model and making that community share offering was so fascinating for me just now when I heard Emma share, and also finding that in between revenue-based funding and also this community-based model is quite fascinating. I feel like these are conversations that I would love to participate and learn more about. Yeah, I think in closing, the last 2 years have yielded more questions and answers. I think despite the challenges, curveballs, highs and lows since we became a co-op, I feel like what is described in this quote really keeps me going. I've seen it happen so many times in our community, right? And I think if we as citizens do not forget our own agency, that we don't just complain, do everything, if only we realize that we have so many strengths, we can do more than voting once every 5 years. Our country, I think, this home we all care about will be better for it. And this can be a Singapore that we will be proud to hand over to our children. For me, I am very fascinated and deeply curious about the possibilities of the co-op model to help humans realize their agency, strengths, and potential to create a better society. Maybe one day in Singapore, we may even have schools like in the Netherlands, or even restaurants like in Europe running using co-op principles. So my last slide is, yeah, if you're interested to bounce ideas about co-ops, hear about these challenges that I described in more depth, or support our members in any way, or join us as a member, please drop us an email or text. I would love to learn from you. Yeah, Christine, I think that's, sorry, I wasn't able to look at the chat, but yeah, I will look at it later and respond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vincent. Next, we'll have Susan. Susan has been very kind to offer to speak less, but we shall not. We want her to speak as much as she wants. And if we have less time for the breakout rooms, or don't even have breakout rooms, that's fine. We'll just have a large conversation. So can I pass the stage to Susan to tell us more about Inspiral?
Thanks so much, Justin. This has been so invigorating so far. So I hope I can keep up the pace. So yeah, I was really delighted to be invited to speak in this learning journey on behalf of the Inspiral Network. Can I just, let me just stop my sharing quickly, and I can't actually see everybody. Maybe I could just get an indication in the chat. If you've heard of Inspiral or know of Inspiral, can you just put a number 1 or something in the chat so I can kind of get a sense of that.
It's probably me and Vincent. And
You
Emma.
and Vincent and Emma. Okay. No, that's all good. That's good. Okay. No, no's are good too. All right. That just gives me a sense of I can kind of start at the beginning. So I think it's important, as always, to tell a little bit of a story about how I guess I find myself here with the privilege of talking to you about this very interesting, not a cooperative, just saying, entrepreneurial collective that we call Inspiral. Why did that happen? Hold on, what have I done? Sorry, everybody. Let me just stop sharing for a second so I can see if I can fix this. Doesn't seem to be cooperating for me. Oh no. I've just lost them all. Okay.
You've lost your slides?
I have, but I've got them back now. I'm all good. Let's go to the slideshow. And I will now share my screen. Yeah. Are you now? I don't know what's happening. Give me a sec. Hold on. I'm just going to switch to PowerPoint because maybe that'll be easier. Here we go. So I guess talking a little bit about my journey, I'm in my 50s. I've already had a full career and a full life before I found Inspiral. I'd always been an entrepreneur, so my kind of career trajectory was as a senior leader in big multinationals. Think about IBM, Vodafone, Telstra, even British Petroleum, where I thought I could change them from the inside, but that's another story. And I kept on getting my heart broken because I always felt like that everybody in the organization seemed to be swimming around in the water, but not being able to name or see the water for what it was. From the perspective of how these old calcified structures actually were designed at a time when the perception of the worker was at best as a cog in the machine, and at worst an expendable unit to be completely used and tossed out. And I was finding that even in these big multinationals, a lot of the assumptions still existed. And I got tired of trying to make incremental change within these systems that didn't see a need to evolve. So stuck in the scientific management paradigm, so stuck in this idea that the organization is a machine, is nothing more than a machine to be optimized. And the people who are in the machine and doing the work are cogs and parts that can be interchangeable. And I think that because of that experience, it was drilled into me that sort of my personal development and my professional development were separate, but somehow that never sat right with me. So in about 2014, I came across these two books. One is Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux, and the other is An Everyone Culture by Keegan and Leahy. And Reinventing Organizations, again, written by Frederick Laloux, who was a consultant at McKinsey. And he, in his work, started to identify organizations across all industries and everywhere in the world that were, for a lack of a better word, creating more soulful, humane workplaces. And in this book, he kind of identifies the key characteristics of those organizations and what had been created. And similarly with Keegan and Leahy in an Everyone culture, they helped me answer that question, or the folly of the assumption that our personal development and our professional development have to be two separate things. Something as simple as challenging me to think that if I'm, for example, working on developing my clarity and my succinctness in how I'm communicating, I have an opportunity to do that in every meeting, right? I have the opportunity to say that I'm doing that in every meeting, and to allow the people that I'm working with to accompany me on my development journey. So again, these two books really changed my life. So here I am sitting in New Zealand thinking, oh my gosh, right? I've left the corporate world. I'm kind of seeing that I'm not a crazy person sitting in the corner, but there are other organizations in the world that are thinking about these things, people who are writing about these things. What do I do? And just by sheer, well, I don't believe in coincidence, but I don't know what it was. I was introduced to a guy called Doug Kirkpatrick, who works at a tomato processing plant in California called Morningstar. And they are one of the companies that are featured in Reinventing Organizations. And I was chatting to him on the phone or on Zoom, and he said, hey, you know, Susan, you know that Inspiral is really into this stuff, and they're right in your country. Why don't you explore them and see what they can offer? I've just had 8 people from the organization come through the tomato plant. So I pulled up my big girl pants and got over my fear that, you know, what are these cool kids gonna want with a old washed up corporate hack like me, and got in touch. And that was the start of the rest of my life. Thinking about how we can move into our organizations and our relationship with work from the perspective of managing ourselves, being in relationships as peers and adults, not needing command and control hierarchy, or I was glad, Emma, that you mentioned this, or consensus, right? Like always striving for everybody to absolutely agree on everything, but to, you know, work through methodologies where we can trust each other, that we have the best intentions, and that we can use this kind of intersection between our autonomy, our agency, and kind of refusing to do the thing that I see many organizations do, which is to pretend that the relational field doesn't exist, right? Because that's another thing that we've been taught. Like when we're in school, we expect, you know, it's expected that we're learning things. We're learning how to do arithmetic, mathematics, physics, but it's also expected that we're learning how to be in relationship. That's what we do in the playground. That's what we do with our friend groups. But then why is it that all of a sudden when we leave school and go to work, we're meant to pretend that the relational field isn't there? I've always found that to be very, very weird and very interesting. But it comes down to the priorities that the organizing philosophy has, which is coercion, control, power over, that we all know, everybody here on this call knows, is no longer serving what we're trying to manifest in the world. But the problem is we don't know how to do it differently. It has become so embedded in us that there is one way to organize that we don't even think about that. We might be the best and brightest entrepreneurs in the world, and I see this all the time with startups in tech, for example. They great progress in whatever the product or service is, but they assume that they can build the company to manifest that potential in the same old way. And everybody is really missing a trick there. The other thing is that, in most organizations, almost everybody is doing the second job, which is covering their weaknesses and trying to look like look their best. And if we can weave the development into the fabric of working life, then organizations will prosper because they'll be actually aligning with people's primary motivation, which is to grow. And so this brings me to Inspiral, more people working on stuff that matters. And it's interesting because the moniker often over the years, there's been, maybe dare say it, like newer people coming into the system that say things like, we need a clearer mission statement, we need a purpose, we need to all be going for the same thing. It's like, no. That's not what Inspiral is. Inspiral is a relationship that allows everybody to bring their unique gift, right? And what we're there to do is to help people have a lived experience of collaboration, autonomy, transparency, diversity, entrepreneurialism, and non-hierarchy. So what Inspiral actually really is it's an entrepreneur's collective that gives people the lived experience of creating their business in a different way. And so we are not dogmatic about whether you're quote unquote social enterprise or not. We're not dogmatic about how you choose to organize the governance of your company. All we are here to do is serve people who want to try things and do things differently and not just do what we've inherited. And it's important, again, that Inspiral is a relationship. It's not a job. Nobody is employed by Inspiral. What we are is a collective of 150 contributors who participate in decisions, budgeting, working groups, and 25 members, each of whom hold one non-financial share. And our only obligation is to steward the efficacy of the foundation. Inspiral is a community by invitation, and this is probably the most obscure part of the system. For example, when I got that talking to by Doug, I went to the Inspiral website. I wrote a note saying, I'm going to be in Wellington. Can I meet with somebody? I had to take the first step, right? I didn't know what was going to happen or come out of this first conversation, but I had to use my agency to say, like, this looks like something that is very interesting. I have a feeling that I will be able to contribute here. Let's have a coffee and a conversation. And that's what I loved from your presentation, Vincent, is that's how things start. The little seeds start with just those exploratory conversations. And yeah, that's what happened. I had a conversation with Rich Bartlett, who's one of the founders of Lumio, who then introduced me to Billy Matheson, who is an amazing guy who had a company within Inspiral called EXP, who introduced me to Alana Irving, who is a legend in her own right. And eventually, after 4 or 5 conversations, I got invited in as a contributor. And that's the I guess that's the first hurdle, do I want to say? But then once you're in the system, you need to navigate it. You need to figure out where your place is. You need to figure out how you're going to contribute and what you're going to do. And then over time, if you stick around and you're finding that it's a fruitful place for your growth and the growth of your initiative, then you will likely get invited to be a member. And so this is how we have built the very extraordinary level of trust within the organism, is by these 2 gates, which is a contributor is somebody that one member trusts, and a member is somebody that all members trust. So in order to become a member, somebody nominates you in Lumio, there's a discussion period, and it's a consent process. If anybody blocks, that person is not invited to membership. So one of the most interesting things for me is, again, because Inspiral is not a company, how do we make money? Well, Inspiral is that very rich soil that grows companies, right? It is the place where we meet our collaborators, where we meet our co-founders, where we come together around what our stuff that matters is, and find the others within the system for whom that resonates. And all kinds of companies here. Lifehack is a youth initiative. Lumio is a decision-making platform. Scoop is an independent news platform. Action Station is a political advocacy group. And Spiral Dev Academy has taught, I don't know, maybe 3,000 young people how to code. Bamboo is a digital agency. Fairground is an accounting company. My company, Greater Than, is a consulting and training company for organizations who want to try this stuff out in their own companies, right? One thing I did want to share, which I think is interesting because we're having this conversation about cooperatives, is that although Greater Than is not a cooperative, what we are is we are a UK registered limited liability company with a cooperative governance structure, but we are also a steward owned company. So this is another model that's quite interesting that I'd encourage you to look into. So we're a stewardship owned company with a golden share model as described by Purpose Fund, which means that we, in our constitution, acknowledge that profits are a means to an end, that we're not looking to grow this company to sell it, and that because we have gifted the golden share to the Purpose Foundation, the guardian share, they have veto power on anything that if we lose our minds and decide to do something crazy, they're going to rein us in. And for us, this actually worked better than a cooperative model, because the other thing that we were trying to do, and Vincent, Justin, you were talking about it in the beginning, is that cooperative model does not guarantee behavior. It does not guarantee governance. It does not guarantee democracy. It does not guarantee participation. And for us, that's the most important thing. So let me just go back to slides now. Gosh darn it. I don't know why I'm having such a problem today. Right.
Do you want us to help you share the slides?
I think I'm good now. I think I got them back. Thanks. So all of this requires a different kind of leadership with a lot of weird words and, new ways of looking at things. So things like people like catalysts, who are the connectors, stewards who look after the people, working groups who align around the work that needs to be done to move the mission forward. I'm also a member of the Minimum Viable Board, which is a different board governance structure, which, unlike most boards, we are not responsible for strategy. All we are responsible for is mitigating risk and ensuring compliance. We've got ambassadors who answer calls like these and talk to people and support other people that are inspired by our work. Friends, contributors, members. It's worthwhile talking a little bit about Lumio, and I think talking about how the tools that we have created and the companies that have created the tools have come about is we very much believe that technology does not mediate behavior in the way that we think is best serves the individual potential of the organization. So Lumio, for example, was like, we like to call it the love child of Occupy and Inspiral. And this came about because in New Zealand and in during the Occupy movement, people were participating, but still feeling and seeing the same patterns of domination, even in scenarios where they were trying to be equal, right? Sitting around in the circle, trying to make the decisions, but noticing that the white guy with the loudest voice was getting all of the airtime, right? That the context was a thing, right? Time to process was a thing. Different ways of understanding information was a thing. And so when that movement ended, and we started practicing with this in Inspiral, we thought, like, how these are our practices: dialogue, consent, building on iterations, et cetera, et cetera. Can we build a tool that can help us do that in a way that's decentralized and distributed? And Loomio now is used by over 100,000 people and like thousands of organizations all over the world. And we make all kinds of different decisions, like, oh, should we adopt this agreement? Or somebody want to go to the winter gathering? Or does somebody want to change the name, right? And the great thing about Loomio is that it creates a persistent record. So we can go back, if you came into Inspiral now, you could see all of the decisions we've made since the beginning of time, which is also pretty cool. Co-budget is the other tool that I really love. So as there started to be abundance in the system, people wanted to like actively support one another's projects or initiatives. So co-budget was created as almost like an internal crowdfunding system, where anybody could put up what's called a bucket or a proposal for something they wanted to get funded. And then you have control of your own funds, and you can choose to support whatever initiatives are important to you, right? So it's not like there's a committee that's deciding every 6 months who gets the funding. No, it's an equitable, continuous process of value exchange through these tools. Relationships are super important to us. One of the things that we started finding was that as we grew, the relationships became more tenuous. So being really intentional about stewarding one another, really making sure that we are connecting in person as much as possible. And look, I'm not going to lie, the pandemic was really hard for us. We gathered in February of I can't even remember the years now, 2020. And that's the last time we've all been together. And yeah, it's been really hard. And engagement is down as a result of that. But I'm really hoping that, next summer in New Zealand, we'll be able to get together again, and that we'll be more energized than ever. I talked a little bit about our relationships to livelihood. We can talk a little bit about how we started to experiment even before that, that list of companies, even before they were born. Many of them started out as something called a livelihood pod. And I'm happy to talk about that a bit later. And then two big principles that we have: everything is public and there's no such thing as IP. Everything is open sourced, and we try to document everything. So hopefully those that know Inspiral will have seen the handbook, and maybe even, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. What have I done now? And maybe even the book. And I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Susan. I ordered your book. I'm waiting for it to arrive. Looking forward to reading it. Maybe now can we invite our discussants? First is Dr. Lim Hong Hui. She's a pediatrician and board chair of Caring SG. Maybe just to share your thoughts on what you've heard so far. You've recently started a very successful nonprofit to support caregivers of people with disabilities, and we had a chat prior to this on whether you thought a co-op would be something in the future. Hong Hui.
Yeah, thanks. I hope everybody can hear me. I have to say this is really a very interesting session, and I'm really grateful for it because I think it's very timely. Yeah, just going backwards, I started Caring SG that was about October 2020, so about 1.5 years ago. At that point in time, I did wonder, should I start a social enterprise, a co-op, or just be a private limited, or then what? Non-profit is either a social enterprise or a charity, right? So I actually just registered first as a non-profit, and then I kind of waver around a little bit and explore here and there, and I explored co-op, but honestly, I feel that the concept of co-op is not very fashionable now in Singapore. It's kind of also a bit new and not many information about it. Everyone is talking about either social enterprise or charity. So I didn't really look at co-op much. I just looked at it and said, oh, it needs to have members, and then members needs to offer services, and then it's kind of business. And I cannot imagine the kind of work that I'm going to do in Caring SG to be in that model. So I kind of like put it away quickly. And then just look at social enterprise and then charity. And the decision factor between social enterprise and charity, again, is because I don't really envision making a business out of supporting caregivers in a way that I want to do in Caring SG. For those who doesn't know Caring SG, we basically is a caregiver organization started by caregivers. And what we wanted to do was to pilot a project that has a certain model of service. We call it 3I Caregiver Support Service Model. And it looks at supporting caregivers of all disabilities across all ages, and looking at supporting them in 3 contexts. One is within the community. So we help caregivers to get into online platforms, social media-based support groups. We connect them to all these support groups so that they can get to know each other and learn from each other. Then we also have online trainings and as well as webinars to help them to understand certain important caregiver topics like future care planning, how to help your child to grow and learn, or how to improve your relationship with your spouse, with your other children, or with your family, things like that. So we have online activities, but we also have physical activities in certain pilot sites in Boon Lay and Kampong Glam to work with the grassroots to intentionally engage the residents, to get them into the community, to participate in community activities. So that's one of the component of 3I model, which is we call it Care Connect. And then the additional on top of, so we want every caregivers to be accessible to Care Connect. And then to be able to access Care Connect. Then later on, then higher tier will be, say we estimate maybe about 1/4 of the caregivers, they need more individual kind of contact, but some of them may be a bit not ready to join a chat group. They want more one-to-one kind of support. So we have caregivers who are willing to journey with other caregivers. We train them to provide emotional support, so they buddy these caregivers. So that's a care buddy program. And the highest level is, so-called highest in the sense that the highest level of support is Care Well, where we have nurse and social worker to provide more individualized service coordination, interim service coordination to help caregivers to reconnect back to mainstream services in the most optimal way. So these are usually those multi-stress families, very complicated social situation or complicated health situation, and caregivers were actually really struggling to cope. So when we first envisioned the kind of work that we have to do, basically our beneficiaries are likely those who doesn't have much money in the first place, and also quite stressed out. So I cannot expect them to start business with us. So that's why we're thinking co-op cannot. Maybe we start a charity kind of work first, and then later on, if we gather enough caregivers who are empowered and they have interest to start businesses and all that, then we start looking at other kind of structure or entity that can support caregivers in what they want to do. So very interestingly, after 1.5 years of running Caring SG, and we get a lot of support from the government and mainstream funders and foundations. So very thankful for that. So at least we are now able to have the fundamental reach and to support the caregivers in very simple, basic ways first. But after 1.5 years, there are some caregivers who actually step forward and say, hey, I got this home-based business. And then another caregiver said, I have this home-based business. And then we want to find out where to find drivers, where to find cheaper packaging, how to do printing of the labels. So we started to put them in a chat group. And I started to think to myself, how to help these caregivers, to grow them. And that was when I recently started to think about co-op, and this invitation from Justin came along. So I thought, good, after this, I know who to consult. I can go to Vincent, I can go to Emma, I can read the book. And so I think it's really very timely, and I would really want to explore this kind of structure to help my caregivers to maybe develop something that they can help themselves and help their children who can't really find work in mainstream system, but maybe they can stay at home and do some business with the support of their caregivers. Yeah, so that is our care cottage kind of idea, where they do cottage business. Then another thing that I was very inspired by what Emma shared about, caregivers supporting each other. There are some for-profit kind of model where caregivers actually provide paid services to other caregivers, but like Caregiver Asia. There are some businesses currently in Singapore doing that. And in Caring Actually, there have been a lot of caregivers asking us, whether our caregiver volunteers or our nurse or social worker can do that kind of work, whether we can provide short-term respite care or caregiving services to our caregivers. And of course, at this stage, our answer is no, because we don't really have that structure and that funding for that. But going forward, maybe what Emma is doing can be something that our caregivers can start to think about. Sometimes after you learn how to care for one child, you also know how to care for another child, right? You can start giving tuition for another friend's son or daughter. After your child has improved and grown up, you may want to help another younger child. So we can help caregivers to do that kind of stuff, and maybe through a co-op model. Yeah, so definitely a lot of food for thoughts for me. So thank you so much for this very, very interesting session. Yeah.
Thank you, Hong Hui. Maybe you can buy a community share and be an investor. So Emma has no choice but to share everything she knows with you.
Oh, yeah. Maybe.
And by the way, Alex Share from the Singapore National Cooperative Federation is here. So that, for people interested in setting up a co-op, they have account managers that will kind of guide you along. But over to Adrian, and then I'll circle back to Vincent for reflections. Adrian, please.
Okay, hi everyone. Maybe just a quick introduction as well. So SGSS was founded way back in actually it's before 2018, but we only officially registered in 2018 as a social enterprise. Before that, just like Dr. Lim as well, we also considered the co-op model as one of the possible registration type that we wanted to go for, but we didn't go for it because of a few assumptions that we had. First of all, majority of the caregivers that we wanted to support wasn't able to afford the service. And secondly, the kind of involvement that we expect from a co-op members is that they have to invest time as well, and they have to do a lot of hands-on matter. And if they're already a full-time caregiver, or they're already so busy as a caregiver, it's very hard for me to assume that they're able to contribute meaningfully into the co-op and therefore grow together as a community. And the third thing is that among all the different models, we felt that as a social enterprise, we can actually help all the individuals to be able to find some form of means to get a service that they really wanted without having to rely on any subsidies or grants that may not be providing the right kind of level of care that they desired. Perhaps as a charity or whatsoever, the kind of care that they can render would be something that they have to design for the mass majority, or for a greater amount of people, rather than more to the depth of care in terms of what we expect a caregiver wants to give to their loved ones. So end of the day, we decided that we want to go to a social enterprise model, so that whatever decision that we do or make, we are making it based on our own individual, as an organization, we're making decision that this is what we want to provide, the kind of care level that we want to provide to the caregivers, rather than having to rely fully on grants, which will affect how we actually render help to the caregivers. So just like Dr. Lim, we considered many factors in terms of how we can support caregivers, ranging from creating a mobile app that connects volunteers to caregivers so that they can find help in a real-time basis, just like getting a Grab or Uber. Gradually, we move on to our own version of Care Connect, just like Dr. Lim, where we provide a teleconcierge support to caregivers so that with one hotline, they can reach out to any kind of help. And even we provide technologies like home sensors and fall detection device to be installed in their home. And through that, we are able to innovate and create a means of providing employment opportunities for ex-caregivers, or even to the underserved communities such as the visually impaired and stroke survivors to become our care agent over the other side of the phone, so that they, as a care recipient themselves or as ex-caregivers, they are able to contribute their skill sets meaningfully by providing a service to other caregivers. So even though as a for-profit, we are trying to find many ways to turn our business model into a very social-driven kind of model. And the co-op model, as far as we have been considered really very hard whether we want to go for it in the beginning of days, we decided not to because I guess our angle is really to serve our, I'll say, intended beneficiaries, which is caregivers, rather than having them to join into this ecosystem. But we do have a future plans in hope that we could be creating a membership that can get all the caregivers to be part of a community that can contribute in different ways, whether as a member of the membership, they can actually run programs together, they could be going for outings together, or even to learn and run programs together. But because of the co-op model in Singapore, I'm not sure, okay, maybe just the lack of knowledge, I'm not sure how much support that we can get as a co-op versus a non-profit. So end of the day, even though we have considered that eventually SGSCs would like to have a non-profit arm, we didn't thought that co-op would be the right model to go for because we don't know how we can actually secure sufficient funding or even support due to the lack of understanding how co-op really operates. So even right now, we were thinking like most probably would likely to go for non-profit model even. So yeah, that's pretty much my take in terms of, I mean, the lack of understanding of what really co-op does and whether there's such a strong support structure, just like Susan and Emma has, back in their country, whereby there's funding and everything, and that is really whether the demographics that we want to serve do we expect them to contribute, or do we want to serve them as a main core business? Yeah.
Thank you, Adrian. Maybe Vincent can, maybe now that you've heard how Spiral is run, any reflections on that, and then I'll give Alex from SNCF an opportunity to share with us more about the co-ops in Singapore if he wants to. Over to you, Vincent.
Yeah, thank you, Justin. Just a quick one. Thank you, Susan and Emma, for sharing. I think what I got from Susan's sharing is the co-op is not just a governance structure, but also a way of being. I think this is the way of being that perhaps I, as an individual, like as a co-op, right, as someone who's involved in the co-op movement, can study. I think the different leadership models that Susan and Emma have outlined, and this whole idea of language is like generative, right? When you're able to use these words, ambassadors, friends, stewards, working groups, I think it creates different possibilities. And this whole models of like sharing power, sharing money, I think what stuck out to me recently, I saw a graphic of innovation, and then they were kind of citing different ways of you can achieve innovation. I think what struck me from Susan's sharing was like innovation in systems for human organization lead to also innovation in the things that we create. So we organize ourselves in different ways. What kind of possibilities does that lead to? Yeah, and I think just one last thing, the distinction between contributors and members was very precious for me, Susan. I immediately maybe took a screenshot and sent that to my board and see like, can we restructure our participation roles to achieve the outcomes that we want. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you've been too inclusive. You must be more picky about who gets to join a good space. Alex, would you like to tell us more about the work in SNCF? And people don't seem to know a lot about co-ops and how to start one, or what kind of support there is for them.
Yeah, yes. Thank you for giving me the space. I think it's been a very great sharing from the different co-ops from overseas as well. For SNCF, Singapore National Cooperative Federation, we are the apex body for the cooperatives in Singapore, and we help to promote the cooperatives in Singapore, and we work very closely with the different co-ops. So for new startup co-ops, yes, we do have grants, and we also run various grants schemes for new co-ops and also existing co-ops. So we are always exploring and talking to new people who are inspired or want to know more about the cooperative movement and also the structure, to come and talk to us. We'll be happy to reach out to you and to share with you more information. But I think there's been a great discussion about how do we get many of the people who are members to be part of the co-op and be involved in the co-op. But I think from what Emma has shared is that there's an underlying belief that when the members are actually the owners, the co-op, right? There has to be greater sense of belonging in the co-op. So we also have different co-ops such as Running Hour, which runs a running club for the visually handicapped, right? And they were very insistent that they are not a charity because they want to be a co-op model, because it is a business for them, and it's business for it is a sense of pride for this group of people, and they see it very differently, and they appreciate the co-op model for it being what it is, that the members are actually the owner. So that position co-ops very differently from many of the other different structures that there are in Singapore. So we are always happy that more people will be able to understand, to appreciate, and also to consider the co-op model. So do reach out to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Since we only have about 10 minutes or so left, we won't have the breakout room. So let's just have a big conversation here. I would like to have open up the floor to people who have questions or want to raise their questions. Of course, we'll read the comments, but if you wanted to ask questions here, please feel free. And while you think of questions, maybe to go back to Emma, now that you've heard, Adrian, you have your hand raised. Please go ahead.
So I have a question maybe to Emma or even Susan, and as well as Alex. I just want to perhaps also kind of like just to understand in your respective organization, how many years or how long does it take you to actually got to a stage of self-sustainability whereby everything starts to get stable and everything? My assumption is going to take about a couple of years before your organization actually stables down and not having to worry about how the organization will be run or how whether is it financially sustainable and so on. Perhaps if you could share some insights on that part, and maybe then back to Alex, what are the funding support that SNCF has been providing to the co-op, and whether the funding support is actually sufficient to help co-op to reach certain sustainability so that they could continue to do their great job.
Well, if it weren't for COVID, we had ambitious targets in 2019. But yes, I think we would have been a darn sight closer to them than we are now in 2022. So there are two aspects to this. One is, if we were just a social care co-op using off-the-shelf technology, we could be sustainable at approximately double the numbers of people that we have at the moment. So 50 care and support workers, assuming that we're still paying the rates that we are. However, we're not doing that. We're building a platform. So overall sustainability, when you're investing in developing digital technology, is much, much, much further away. The options that we have at the moment are these two scenarios. One where we do just become a social care co-op. So we build the platform to the extent that we can with the money that we have available. And then what we concentrate on doing is just maintaining what we've got, and then focusing purely on achieving enough growth to be sustainable locally, which is a much smaller vision than the one that we've set out with. And then the scenario 2 is that we do need to be live and delivering in at least 2 local authority locations. So that's around 150 to 160 care and support workers working through the platform with equal care on an employed or a self-employed basis before we're able to hit sustainability and also sustain the costs of a small not very well paid development team. So yeah, the platform bit in the platform co-op, when you lodge that against the kind of investment that you see digital startups in care spending in and launching in London and Manchester, the larger towns in the UK, it's bootstrap all the way for equal care until we can crack the investment nut.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, it depends on what you're talking about, right? Are you talking about the collective of humans supporting each other, or are you talking about a profitable business? I think the shortest I would say would be 18 months, and the longest probably 4 years, depending on how experimental you are. That's how I'd answer the question.
So answering to Adrian's question, I think during the COVID period and even before the COVID period, there are co-ops that started, and there are also co-ops that do not make it after a while. So the primary thing for co-op is that first thing is we also want our co-ops to be financially sustainable, which means that they have to sustain themselves through their profits. And then by achieving that, when they start up or as they grow, we do have grants in place for the startup and also for existing co-ops, which I'll paste in the link, which you can take a look. There are different grants that looks at training, development, your CAPEX, OPEX expenses. So that's for you to have a better understanding. On the part, I'd like to address one question on whether we are related to IRAS. So for co-ops in Singapore, we don't pay tax, corporate tax to IRAS. We pay a contribution to the central cooperative funds. And for co-ops with surplus below 500K, it's a 5% contribution. And for those above 500K, is 20% contribution. So for most of the smaller and medium co-ops, which means that they pay the 5% to the central cooperative fund. And this cooperative fund is kind of decided by the Central Cooperative Fund Committee appointed by MCCY to decide what to do with the money. And most of the money do plow back to the grants, which we give to try to grow the co-op sector and also to give back to the movement as well. So this is how I would say the cycle of the money from better doing for better co-ops to help the newer and the smaller co-ops in the movement. So there are also more information which I can paste the link on MCCY. What is the place of MCCY in all of these co-ops? So MCCY is the larger ministry. There is the Registrar of Cooperative Societies that looks at the governing, which is the governing body for the different co-ops. Yeah, I hope I've answered some of the questions here.
Thank you, Alex. Simon has asked 2 questions. Maybe you would like to combine them. Simon, would you like to? You had questions about the investors that people are attracting and whether, given the ESG trend, there are more institutional investments in this space. And you're asking this of Emma and Vincent.
Yeah, Adrian actually, I just want to say that Adrian just gave me a nice reply. There was reading through here. I guess most of the investors are looking at probably more motivated by passion and the cost, I suppose, from Adrian's sharing here. But then again, I think building a co-op model is also a lot about sustainability, right? So having a viable business model, I think that's also important. And that's how you also, so I think Emma in the earlier on also mentioned about co-op. The challenge is, you have investors withdrawing money, right? And then that basically deprives organization of cash flow as well. So I guess, I mean, yeah, so that was one question which I think Adrian has replied. And then the other thing is about talking about the current ESG trend. Do you actually see, maybe Emma or Vincent, since you operate a kind of community fund of sort, right? Do you actually see an uptick of more institutions investing in this space?
Yes, is the short answer. There's been this huge growth in impact investment interest and activity, certainly in the UK and the US. The difficulty is being able to sort the wheat from the chaff, because some VCs are using it as a kind of byline for, you know, this organization's doing good stuff, but we're still expecting 100x return from these guys when they sell. So not really doing anything to change the kind of the current system of where the money flows go. But there is, yeah, the crossovers with ESGs being and starting to create funds that are made up of organizations that can accept that kind of investment. So I said in the chat as well, but like the barriers is that we cannot currently accept that kind of investment, and they cannot invest in us unless it was through a revenue-based kind of debt-like instrument, which may be equity on our balance sheet, but to them it sort of acts and feels very much like debt. Or the community shares model, which is a low rate, typically a low rate of return, and fixed at a set commitment, which also means that the investor kind of loses that connection with the organization when they can see the value of that, like the value or the returns of their investment change as a result of the cooperative's fortunes. So yeah, but there are, so Omidyar Foundation, Resolution Ventures, Friends Provident Foundation are a few of the ones that we're tackling at the moment. But yeah.
Thanks.
We have just 3 minutes left. I wonder if we could have just maybe Hong Hui, then Adrian share their, the most interesting thing that you've kind of got from today, and then we'll get back to Susan and Emma for their last words. Hong Hui, anything?
I would say the most interesting thing is how co-op can be a way to kind of even out the market. You know, the thing that Emma shares about, you know, how you change the way money flows is very interesting to me. So I really want to read up more and understand how that works. Because I think caregiving is a place where it's really expensive to get formal caregiving support, but at the same time, it's something that is so needed. So how can we make services for caregiving to be more equitable, and how can we, you know, bring in that democracy into this whole equation? I think that's very interesting. So I certainly will have to read up more about it. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Hong Hui. Adrian?
Yeah, I think for today's session, I think I would like to thank Emma and Susan, because your sharing has actually given a lot of insights how we could, in many ways, learn from your experience and run something meaningful in Singapore. So I'm saying this as a social enterprise that has always looked into how co-op could be a potential model, as well as an existing co-op model in a good space, knowing that there's a bunch of passionate change makers in Singapore that wanted to do good and trying to find the right model to work together. So yes, that would be my response. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks, Adrian. We'll go to Vincent, Susan, then Emma. Vincent, any parting reflections for us?
No, Justin, just want to say thank you to you and IPS and also Emma and Susan for coming to share. I feel like this is really how this whole co-op movement, actually in Singapore, I think the first co-op was 1924, right? Alex, correct me if I'm wrong. So actually it's quite old.
Yes, there are some going to celebrate 100 years in a few years' time.
Yeah, so this idea of, we have, in 100 something years, we only have 86 co-ops. So could we have maybe, I don't know, 100, 200 right, in the next few years, and bring these possibilities that Susan and Emma have explored overseas here. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Vincent. Susan?
Thanks. I've just put into the chat here a couple of organizations, disability services, caregiving organizations that are really walking the talk when it comes to participatory, democratic, people first, human-centered care. One is Avivo in Perth, Australia, and the other is Totoka Options here in New Zealand. So if you want any further inspiration about what's possible, either reach out to them directly, or I can certainly make the connections, because they're always willing to share their experience and motivate others to try different things. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. I keep forgetting this, and Jasmine always reminds me that there's a feedback form we can fill in, and she'll put in the chat. And so over to Emma for the last word.
Oh, it's been so lovely connecting with you all, and feels a little bit surreal as well. It's kind of, yeah, New Zealand, Singapore. Woof.
One good thing that happened because of COVID. You guys would you have flown to Singapore if otherwise?
Yes, definitely. I think the most important challenge for cooperatives is to work out this funding mechanism. And if we can do that with committed regulators, with committed prospective investors, and committed cooperatives that have viable business models, then we have a genuine shot at tilling the ground, sowing the seeds, and not being the exceptions to the rule, but becoming the rule.
Thank you so much, Emma. Thanks everybody for being here. See you next Wednesday if you want to continue the conversation. If not, have a good day, everybody.